Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&A, something I'm going to do slightly different today, and I'll just see how it comes across with people. I normally do all the timestamps in here, but right now, because of the editing process and uploading process of how long it takes me to get these videos up, it is actually adding like 30 minutes to my prep time to put these videos up to do the timestamp, because I have to go through it, and as I'm chopping out the little pauses, because a lot of times I take little 10-second pauses to think before I speak, because I do so many questions back to back without really putting any thought into what I'm going to say. I just do these off the cuff. I just pick the questions real quick, throw them on my phone, and run over and do it. I don't get much time to think about it. And so I do my little pauses and clip them out, but then finding the exact times of each question ends up adding quite a bit of time to my editing. So I'm going to skip that today, and hopefully everyone's okay with it and they don't get upset, because I know some people do really appreciate that. Same format as usual though. Most of the questions, 2/3 of the questions, are going to be general fitness, training, things like that. I'm going to segue into a little bit of PED questions near the end and TRT questions, and then I will answer a personal question last, so that the people who just want the normal content don't have to listen to any of that. All right, first question. Jason, you have said before that when you are a teen, you should not cut unless excessively overweight. With this being said, should a teen just eat at maintenance consistently to maintain their weight while gaining strength, or should they bulk and potentially put themselves overweight during a period in which they said they shouldn't cut? All right, yeah, I've said those before, and it has to do with affecting your hormones and your development by possibly becoming malnourished as a teen. And I know some people say, well, there's these teen bodybuilders. Well, being a competitive bodybuilder isn't healthy, and doing it as a teen is not healthy. It could affect your reproductive system, how tall you get, things like that. I see a lot of guys talking about drugs and things. Can I take this drug to get taller in their teens? Yet a lot of other teens want to cut. Well, if you want to actually risk stunting your growth a little bit as a teen, diet, go on a cut, lose weight for any length of time. That could actually contribute to this. So what I'm going to say is, yeah, that's right. Teens, unless they're overweight, because being overweight is unhealthy. If you're carrying too much body fat, that's definitely not healthy. I mean, if you're walking around at 25% body fat as a male teenager, or 30 or 35% as a female, no, that's unhealthy. You should go on a diet for a little while and lose the weight, because the negative health effects of being obese are worse than the negative health effects of maybe being a half inch too short, because you were malnourished or whatever. But you're less likely to be malnourished when you have those body fat stores you're losing that are excessive. So what I'm going to say is, if you're not in that range, you don't lose weight. Doing a recomp for a period of time while eating maintenance calories and staying at the same weight while strength training and doing cardio and eating a good, balanced, wholesome diet is a good way to do this. You can go ahead and gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. However, I'm going to recommend that you don't do this for something like a year straight. If you want to do this for a few months to recomposition as a teen, that's probably fine. Just make sure that you don't have any dietary deficiencies. You're eating plenty of, vegetables and whole foods and things like that. Would be a good idea, so that you're not risking not getting some important vitamins and minerals. Then when you get lean enough, then you can go on a nice little clean bulk, because you do need to gain some weight as a teenager. That actually is important for your overall development of your organs, your reproductive system, your bones, things like that, of getting sufficient nutrition to gain a little bit of weight. Not saying you should do a dirty bulk as a teen, because I don't recommend that unless you're going to be a football player or something. So again, you could do periods of recomposition followed by periods of very slow, clean bulking, and it will help you as a teen with your teenage metabolism. That's a good way to gain muscle while staying pretty lean without risking any developmental problems or dietary deficiency problems. So that's how I would go about it for a teenager. All right, next question. Hi Jason, it's often touted that cardio equipment in gyms overpredicts the number of calories burned for a given workout, even when the body weight stats are inputted. However, given most bodybuilders carry a significant amount of lean tissue than the average person, could this mean the machines could be underpredicting in this population? Yeah, the machines do tend to overpredict, and then you are right, with bodybuilders that could be underpredicting. But the other thing to consider with a lot of the very large bodybuilders is that many of them are on metabolism boosting drugs. Anabolic steroids are actually going to affect caloric output to some extent, but particularly like the fat burning drugs, guys. A lot of these bodybuilders are on things like T3 and Clen and stuff, and that's going to push their metabolic rate, particularly when they're being physically active, even higher than their body weight might predict. So there's so many variables in there that you can't really tell. What I would say, these machines in general are not accurate for anyone, but they can be used as a baseline. So if you're using a machine and every time you go to the gym and you do it 4 times a week and it said you burn 400 calories, as long as it's consistent And what it's doing, and you're burning 400 every time, even if it's off by 100 calories either direction, you still are being consistent enough that you should know how to adjust your total food intake as far as your body weight goes. The main thing there as far as controlling calories in, calories out, whether you're trying to bulk or cut, and trying to keep control of your body composition there with your caloric balance, it's mainly just important that you be consistent in your level of activity. You don't want to go do randomly large amounts of extra activity or large amounts less than you're normally doing while trying to maintain a constant caloric intake, because that's going to throw things out of balance. So really the thing is, when it comes to net calorie turnover, it's more important that you just be consistent in what you're doing, and as long as you're inaccurate, you're consistently inaccurate on what you eat or what you burn, because then you'll at least be consistent and and have control of your weight changes. So it's consistency is actually more important than actual accuracy. As long as you're consistent in your inaccuracies, you'll have tighter control of things even without knowing the true numbers. And it makes sense when you stop and think about it objectively. All right, next question. What do good genetics look like in the case of MMA? For bodybuilding and powerlifting, we know it's things like neural efficiency, increased recovery rates, ability to build muscle easier. But how does one know she has good genetics for MMA? Honestly, someone else answered this question partially under there. It's kind of the same thing that you're looking for powerlifting. MMA fighters need to be explosive and powerful. If you want to kick or punch somebody, you need to have speed, strength, power. Same thing as a power lifter or an Olympic lifter. Even a grapple or a hold is still going to be done with your upper threshold muscle fibers. If you put someone in a grapple, you're squeezing with a lot of force in various holds. That is still a power component. So if you have someone, you look for the same thing, someone who gains strength and power easier. MMA doesn't need the same extreme conditioning that, say, a marathon runner or a triathlete has. So the extreme endurance genetics don't necessarily need to be there. What people are looking for MMA, I would say the same thing you're looking for other strength and speed sports, combined with obviously the ability to think tactically. So you do need a mental component as well that you may not need for those other sports. Someone who is a quick thinker, who can think strategically on their feet in a stressful situation, is obviously going to be better at learning technique and doing the right things in the fight and responding more appropriately, combined probably with a above average pain threshold. Because again, the same thing, when you're experiencing pain, if you don't have a pain threshold, your ability to think clearly and respond in those situations is going to be lower. So those would be the three things I would say an MMA fighter should look for, you should look for in someone to be a good MMA fighter, just based upon the basic needs of that particular sport. All right, next question. What are the benefits of stretching the ulnar nerve? If so, how? Luimarco talks about this fairly often, almost on a daily. He even said that Dorian Yates would look like Arnold if only he stretched it properly. This would be great news for you, since you and Dorian have that similar weakness, unaestetic biceps, brachii-insertions, no homo. I do agree, man. I do. That's a weak genetic trait for me. Actually, my tricep insertions are even worse than my bicep. My bicep insertions aren't that bad. It's my triceps, the lower insertions, that really make it difficult for me to make my arms look big. So the guy is actually right. I do have definite insertion issues. It just basically means I'm never going to have fantastic looking arms genetically. We just deal with the cards we're dealt with, right? That's what all of us have to do. Not everyone could be born with the perfect genetics for everything, unfortunately. But as far as the stretching goes, no, you're not going to stretch the nerve. And the thing is, stretching of muscles has more to do with active recovery, and maybe in some extreme cases, weighted stretching inducing very small amounts of hypertrophy. But stretching these muscles is not going to change the insertion points. It's not going to change the muscle fiber lengths. It's not going to make permanent structural changes. When you see guys who make permanent structural changes to muscles, it's either because they use some combination of special drugs that might have increased their muscle fiber count through some hyperplasia and additional satellite cell proliferation, or because they've injected something or an implant or some sort of site enhancement into there, and that has made it change shape down at those insertion points. It's not something they've done through stretching. That's just not reality. That's not how the body works. All right, next question. Why do you think U.S. Olympic weightlifters are so far behind those from Eastern Europe? Surely these days they all have access to the same drugs and equipment. Could it be a training cultural thing or just pure luck? I think it's a combination of factors. Number one, genetics. People from Eastern Europe, Russia, things like that tend to be stronger pound for pound. They're not always have the most endurance oriented muscle fibers. I'm actually Eastern European genetics. If you guys figure out from my last name, Blaha, that's not exactly an Anglo-Saxon name. Much of my ancestry is Czechoslovakian and Slavic in general. So people from those countries tend to have certain genetic differences in terms of things like joint size. Makes a big difference in total strength and tonnage that you can handle. Also will mean thicker connective tissue, less likely to tear things. A larger predisposition towards fast twitch muscle fibers. These are generally mountain dwelling people that had to do heavy climbing, not run out for as long on open plains, because most humans are really endurance oriented. So you've got these genetic components. You've got the fact that many of these are former communist countries. So you've had, to some extent, possibly not necessarily specialized breeding programs. They do that with selection to somewhat in China, but more the Eastern Bloc countries and things, it's been more of a case of people who have certain genetics for strength sports oftentimes marry other athletes. So it's not necessarily a state-funded program, I don't think, like they've had in China, but more a case of people just naturally gravitating that way because that's their interest. And in these countries, when you're an athlete like that, your whole life revolves around it. So you meet other athletes oftentimes. So you do get cases of that, but there is that strong genetic component. And then there's a training component because you're dealing oftentimes with these countries to where the Olympic athletes and the strength athletes, they've started training from a very, very young age. They were oftentimes maybe hand-selected state sponsorship. They start training them from a young age. Their whole life revolves around it. And a lot of the training protocols there don't allow for you to have free time outside of the gym. So they spend a lot more hours lifting in the gym heavy and their lives focused around recovery and less about having their own individual lives like we maybe do in the West. We've always been more focused upon individual freedom, so no one's going to dedicate, at least not athletes, particularly through their formative and teen years all the way through early adulthood. It's going to be rare for them to devote 70 to 80 hours of their week around their sport. So there's that component and the fact that they probably just in general train harder because that's kind of what their entire lifestyle revolves around. Oftentimes their dedication to the time as they sink into it is going to be a little higher than Western athletes due to the differences in our culture and lifestyle. So those are factors also. So the training programming itself is oftentimes not as intensive over here as it is over there. So you've got a combination of factors, and it makes it more difficult for us to beat them and win at this particular sport. All right, next question. Jason, for a basic linear periodization strength program like yours, with adjustments, if any, would you make for somewhat moderately enhanced? Is there a general rule to follow, such as increased volume, doing more than 5x10 on the deadlifts? Makes my beard grow just thinking about it. No, guys, actually linear periodization programs that are well written work very, very well for both completely drug-free guys as well as moderately enhanced. If anything, what you'll find, someone who's just moderately enhanced running those programs is going to make slightly faster progress. Now, if this is their first blast through, you might want to consider more aggressive programming. You might want to increase the weight a little faster for someone on a linear periodization who's on drugs. However, once they're used to being on drugs, if they've been doing drugs in the past and it's not their first time doing it, they're already larger and stronger. Therefore, the gains are going to slow back down. And at that point, there's no reason you shouldn't run the same sort of progression pattern that you run on someone who's drug-free. And just understand that they're still going to do a little better on it. They're going to make more gains off of it. But the thing is, you have to remember at a certain point, even drug-free, guys on drugs don't keep growing fast all the time. At a certain threshold, they get the same diminished returns a natural lifter does. It's just that their set point is set much higher because the drugs are packing extra muscle on them. But at a certain point, if they're on the same amount of drugs, they drop down to where they're only gaining a pound of muscle a year. And that's why you see all these bodybuilders and people always continually increasing the dose, because they get diminished returns eventually, just like a drug-free person does on a given amount of hormone level. Drug-free persons at this hormone level, they'll start experiencing diminishing returns the bigger they get very, very rapidly. Well, guys on drugs, the hormone level's up here, so they're holding more muscle, but then they'll see the same pattern of diminished returns. They'll just be bigger and stronger. And unless, again, they change their hormone levels. So it's not that different for them. The only time this stuff really starts to matter is when people start increasing the dose or they're on a heavier dose than they've previously been. Otherwise, if there's being conservative at all, they can really train the same way a drug-free lifter does and still maximize their benefits. So there's a bit of a myth there that people who are being consistent and moderate with it need to necessarily change their training from a drug-free guy. And they just have more wiggle room for mistakes to continue to make good gains even if they fuck up more. All right. Next question. Floor presses for getting better at flat bench presses, are they really useful for people with weak lockouts, or is it better just benching more or other exercises? Please, I'm weak just at my lockouts. First of all, if you're a raw bench presser, you're not weak at your lockout. You need to lose this idea. There's a 95% of raw bench pressers are weak off the chest. You're not weak at your lockout. You're slowing down in the middle because you're not able to generate enough speed off of the bottom, most likely. Do more pause benching. And the floor press is not a lockout accessory, because if you're big enough, you touch your chest on the floor press. For me, if I lay on the floor and do a floor press, the bar still barely touches my shirt. It doesn't sink in like it does on a flat bench, but I can touch, just barely reach my pecs, just barely makes contact with them on it. So it's not a lockout. The thing that the floor press lets you do is take the leg drive and the core and everything out. The floor press allows you to use just the primary movers without leg drive and things, so that you can develop more power from a dead stop. Because you come down to the floor, you pause, and you press. So you're learning to develop more power from a dead stop without being able to utilize things like leg drive or whatever to help get the weight started. So it still could be a useful tool for you, because I suspect your lockout is that you slow down 3 inches off the chest because you don't get enough speed, and you just think it's the lockout, and it really has nothing to do with your last couple of inches. Unless you're an equipped lifter, then that's a different animal, and I don't really cover much about equipped lifting on this channel. It's just not interesting enough to me, and there are plenty of resources out there like Westside Barbell if that's what you're doing. But you could definitely try floor presses, but I would say for you, a lot of pause pressing would probably help you more, but floor presses are also a valuable tool for this. All right, next question. This one is kind of going to segue us into the drug. It's not really a full drug question because it's an athlete question, and then after this, everything's going to skip over to the PED and TRT type questions. Mate, I've been all over the internet for the past couple years, and it's evident that drugs are a polarizing topic. An article I read on breaking muscle had a rather pragmatic approach to testing at the Olympic level, and just wanted to get your opinion on it. The new system would have athletes using whatever they like as long as particular health markers were met. The author used endurance athletes and hemoglobin as an example. 0.5 is considered genetically elite, and the cases of 0.7 after EPO use have been linked to those particular athletes suffering from strokes due to increased viscosity of the blood. What do you think of this? A nice idea, or just another system to beat through cheating? Honestly, I think if we're going to do drug testing in sports, this is the way we need to go, because everyone talks about fair. There is no fair play in sports. Sports are war. They are about winning. They're about having better training, better genetics, better drugs. There's nothing fair about competing against someone who has better genes than you for the sport, who is just genetically stronger than you, or produces more red blood cells, or has a different muscle fiber distribution. That's not fair. They're inherently unfair. It's not all about just hard work. It is about talent. That's unfair already. So the whole fair play thing goes out the window with the drugs. The concern, the only real concern is, are we killing these athletes? Are the athletes going to die young because of the drugs they're pumping into their body to win? That's the important question. And I think this is the best way to address that. That way they're forced to utilize doctors more, to go see doctors, make sure their blood work looks good. And if their blood work doesn't look good and they're not healthy, then they can't compete. So at that point, the health of the athlete becomes ingrained in their mind, their coach's mind, in terms of what they can and can't get away with. And it has them focus on being healthy while being an amazing athlete to actually stay competitive. I really like this idea. I think it is a fantastic way to go to balance out the fact that athletes can and will continue to use drugs in every sport around the world, no matter what testing you implement. But in this case, we can limit the use for the real reason. We don't want their health markers to go bad. We don't want their HDL cholesterol to tank. We don't want to see their liver enzymes look like that of an alcoholic. We don't want to see their blood so viscous that they have strokes from it. We don't want the athletes to die as a result of what they need to do for their sport. So by looking at the health markers, we lower the risk of them harming themselves. And I think that that is an absolutely fantastic approach, and that is one that I could actually get behind as someone who's okay with drugs in general in sports, because we're focusing upon the real issue there, the health of the athlete. And I think that really needs to be the important component when we're looking at drugs in sports. I think that's the most important component, and that addresses it perfectly. All right, now let's segue into some serious questions on this topic. Hey Jason, studies have shown that testosterone levels in men to have dropped from 1,000 to 2,000 nanograms per deciliter in the early 20th century to about 300 to 800 nanograms per deciliter. Are there any ways to reverse the effects both chronologically and acutely too? And if so, what ways are there? I don't believe this data. I think that we could have dropped some because we're less physically active. We have all these environmental toxins, environmental estrogens, things like that, which can affect us. But I don't think that we've actually dropped from 1,000 to 2,000 in men in the last century. I very heavily question the data and the experts who've extrapolated this data. I don't think that they actually have proof of this. So when people are talking about this has been proven, no, the proof of this is absurdly weak. It is possible, but it seems really weak with the currently available data. So no, I don't think that that's actually the case. So I'm not sure there's anything we can really do about that. What I will say, though, if it really is a concern for you, maybe environmental estrogens and things could be an issue. Maybe look into what products you use, products you have in your home that produce these, reduce those. If you live near large industrial complexes or chemical plants, consider moving. And just try to eat a healthy, balanced diet that doesn't have any dietary deficiencies in it, and be physically active. And that's probably the best thing you can do for that. Unless you get to a point to where you actually need TRT, in which case then you go to your doctor and sort that out. All right, next question. Hey Jason, do you have any recommendations on how to avoid acne while on TRT or test-only blasts? And is Proviron useful for a test-only blast? Thanks. All right, most anabolic steroid-induced acne, some people want to argue about this. They say it's not hygiene. It actually is hygiene unless you're already genetically predisposed to certain types of acne cysts and you get those anyways. If you don't have bad acne and certain types of cysts already, even if you have good hygiene before you go on, the gear is not going to give you this. It's generally caused from the androgens binding to the androgen receptors in the sebaceous glands of your skin and making your skin more oily. More oil means that more dirt clogging your pores will cause your oil to boil up and infect more into there. It'll clog up and it'll get infections. More oil on your skin than normal also allows bacteria to grow faster, so you get infections. That's what the acne is. It's little pustules from infected oil on your skin and under your skin. So the best thing you can possibly do for this is better hygiene. What I recommend for guys who really suffer from acne problems, go take hot Epsom salt baths. Like soak in hot Epsom salt so that it opens up the pores, and that salt, that saline from the Epsom salt gets in there and flushes out the oil from out of your pores so that it cleans everything out, and it'll help clear your acne up tremendously. Mash the acne if you can before you get in there, and it will clean it out and help sterilize it, kill the bacteria, and flush out all the extra oil. If it's really a problem for you, you need to do that at least once a day. You need to focus on your general hygiene. If you get really sweaty at the gym or work or anything else, you need to immediately get to a shower, a hot shower, get you a good back brush so that you can get soap in there and scrub all of those areas where you get it, so that if they've been sweaty for any length of time, so that you don't develop new acne from it. You combine that with those hot Epsom salt baths, and for 90% of guys who have this problem, it will clear right up. As far as Masteron goes, Masteron is a very, very mild anabolic steroid with a high androgen profile. A lot of people, experts, including like medical doctors like Dr. Scally, who does work with athletes and prescribes drugs and things for them, or has in the past, before he kind of got, and I think he might have gotten a little trouble for it. I'm not sure, so I don't want to go on record saying that. But I know that he said in the past that he thinks Proviron is mostly useless for all purposes, medical and muscle growing, that it's so weak to be barely useful for anything at all. It can be worth trying, but for your money, it's probably not your best option to add to anything. For what most people are trying to use it for, something like Masteron is probably a more effective substance for them to use at that point when combined with testosterone. All right, next question. Hi, Jason. I've heard the term saturated receptors pertaining to when the body no longer responds to anabolics due to abuse/overuse. Is this accurate, and how does this happen? No, this is an old theory that bodybuilders came up with. It's not actually true. We know from the research that androgen receptors do not oversaturate, they upregulate. So what happens when you reach a point of androgen receptor saturation, which means you put as many androgens into your body as your muscle tissue and other things can absorb, and then you have extra androgens floating around causing more side effects, eventually those receptors will upregulate, meaning you will develop more androgen receptors in the muscle tissue so that the muscle tissue can actually utilize a larger amount of the androgens. And remember, all androgens use the exact same receptor in the muscle tissue. They don't have different receptors for different drugs. They all use the same ones. So that's also a myth. But they upregulate to accommodate more over time. So the longer someone stays on a high dose, the more that their muscle tissue directly responds to it, because it upregulates, and then they can increase and use more and benefit from more than they could early on. If you use a large amount early on, you just get more side effects without more gains. But they upregulate. The reason guys get less gains over time has to do with the other points that I've made. This is the biggest reason. The more muscle you hold, the harder it is to gain muscle. So at the receptor level and the cellular level in the muscle tissue, the drugs might be working actually more effectively after 12 or 15 or 20 weeks than when you started. They're actually having a stronger effect. But because your body is resistant to gaining more muscle, it's your body itself. It's things like your myostatin. It's things like your cortisol. It's things in your body saying, hey, I need to slow down getting bigger. I don't want to get bigger. The drugs themselves are creating a larger anabolic response as the dose goes up over time. They're creating a larger anabolic response at the time in the muscle tissue, but you have other factors in the body fighting back, not wanting you to gain muscle. So it's not to do with desensitization to the drugs. It's just your body being resistant to gaining more muscle. The bigger you are, the harder it becomes to gain more muscle using any method that you're using, whether it's a training method or eating more food or a drug or anything else. The human body doesn't like to gain large amounts of muscle mass. So it is your body resisting against it. It's not building a tolerance to the drug. The drug actually becomes stronger over time. All right, next question and last question of the week, and this one's a more personal question, slightly firearm related. Hey Jason, do you have any recommendations on CC options for the gym? CC meaning concealed carry. Yeah, there's a lot of options there. If you don't want to wear inside the waistband, because that can be very difficult for certain types of training. Now, you can get holsters that will work inside the waistband. You can also get little smaller pocket pistols that you only have at the gym that you can put in your gym shorts. You can sometimes even get holsters that will clip into the gym shorts. I don't really discuss what I might do personally because, again, I don't want people to be aware of what I'm doing. If I get bothered, I've had enough stalkers and other things and people know where I train, that I don't want them to have any idea what my capabilities are. I don't want to tip them off. But those are options. Some smaller pocket pistols will still clip inside the waistband without being noticeable and without impeding your training. But again, the belts and things can become a problem. So again, for that person, the little pocket pistols might work. People who like to train in boots, ankle holsters, smaller handguns, a Glock 26 or any micro pistol with an ankle holster if you train in any sort of boots at the gym. That's one reason some guys might be training in work boots and you not realize it, because they're carrying their piece. Especially if you live in a place like Texas where I do, where so many people conceal carry, including at the gym. And then what I know a lot of guys do, in fact, at least one fitness celebrity that you guys know of who's on YouTube himself, just carry their stuff in their gym bags. Their actual gym bags they have with them, they have guns and things in them. But again, that's an option that you've got to be very careful with. And if that's an option that you go with, you need to realize that other people might be able to get to your firearm if they open your gym bag. But the thing is, if no one knows where it's at in a gym bag, no one knows you have it there, that's also an option. Just keep in mind that that is, in some ways, the riskiest option that you have available, because you've got to get to your bag, and there's always a chance that someone else might get to it also, which is, again, a bit of a problem. So those are kind of the various methods that you can use. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.